All right, everybody, we are now on to chapter 11, and this is the chapter on body composition. And really two general parts to this. One is around the techniques of body composition and understanding those. And the second part is around which athletes want to lose weight, which athletes want to gain weight and gain lean muscle mass in particular, how we go about doing that and do it safely and effectively. We'll get into all that coming up. But so the first part of this is just to understand the idea of body composition. What is it and all the things. All right. So if you're ready, let's go ahead and jump in. So let me verify that you can see my screen. It's just a white screen that says body composition. Give me a thumbs up. Okay. Gage says yes. All right. So we are rocking and rolling. Let's do this. So when we look at body composition, what we see is there are different models of body composition. Some are very technical, like you see this chemical model where you're looking at fat and like lean muscle and water and minerals and all the things. And there's an anatomical model, and then there's a two-component model. And it's the two-component model that most of us will use when we assess body composition in a fitness center, in a clinic, hospital setting. That's usually what we do because we don't necessarily have the equipment. You need sophisticated equipment to do some of these higher level, like the chemical anatomical models. We'll go through these, but just know when you do and measure body composition, it's part of a two-component model. Is basically you've got fat mass and you've got fat free. And a lot of our techniques, really just because they're pretty simple, they only use these two components. So let's go ahead then and let's talk about these. So and I think you know this, right? So fat mass is basically the amount, how your body is composed and how much fat is there, right? And then the fat free is everything else. Because like I said, we don't have a sophisticated way to determine all of this in most cases through our techniques for body assessment or body composition assessment, depending on where you are. If you're in a clinic and you've got more equipment, and we'll talk about that, then you could maybe do some of these higher level tests. But in most cases, we don't have that. So, and just know when we talk about fat-free mass, it's basically everything else. You've got fat, and then everything else is considered fat-free. And there's a little bit of confusion here because oftentimes you'll hear people talk about lean body mass. Well, lean body mass is part of fat-free mass. Does that make sense? So if you've got somebody, and let's see if I can type this in here, and let's see, they weigh 175 pounds, and you do their body fat, and you calculate their body fat, it's let's say 17%. I'll just put body fat. How much fat is that? Well, you basically go 175 times 0.17, and I don't have my calculator, and that tells you how much fat. Right? Somebody do that real quick. Well, I got a calculator right here. You probably beat me to it. 175 times 0.17. That's about 30 pounds of fat. Yeah. Gage got it. Yeah, about 30 pounds of fat. So if they have 30 pounds of fat, how much is fat free? Well, if we said they were 175 pounds minus 30 pounds equals, right? That's how much fat free they have. So that's 155 pounds. Oh no, 145 pounds. 45 pounds fat free mass. Now, this doesn't mean that they have 145 pounds of muscle. This is everything. So when you talk about fat free, and this is the difference, right? This is where you have this is everything. This is bone, connective tissue, organs, the whole works. So just know there's a technical difference between lean muscle mass and fat-free mass. Everybody okay with just how to do that easy assessment of, and it makes it simple because you're either this part is fat and the rest is not. Okay. Everybody good with this? And while I got it on the slide, I wanted to mention this. I've got a picture of an individual, and he's a little heavy, right? Got a little extra around the middle, but he's exercising. And what I would say is that I would much rather have somebody who's maybe got a little weight to lose compared to someone, and that they exercise regularly, compared to someone who's thin and doesn't exercise. Thin does not always equal healthy. How many of you guys are aware of that? We tend to look at someone's shape and think, oh, they're healthy, but that's not the case. And you know, like I said, I'd much rather have somebody who exercises regularly, and maybe they have a little extra to lose. You know, they're exercising, but maybe it's not enough to help them lose the weight. And that could be because they're eating too much, or that could be because you know, they're not exercising like they should. Skinny fat. Okay, yeah. Here's what you would also see, though, because my wife used to work at a construction company, and we'd do wellness testing, and you'd get all these people who were skinny, right? But you do like blood work. The blood work was terrible, right? They would have, first they would have high blood pressure, cholesterol, glucose, right? They'd be diabetic. So you really can't tell someone's health and get the full picture by just looking at the outside, right? You need to also look at the inside. And by the same token, like this fella, like I knew a guy, we would do, like I said, do wellness testing at this construction company. And this fella was 400 pounds, which on the outset, you would think, oh my gosh, if you're 400 pounds, you've got to be unhealthy. But we did his blood work. His blood work was perfect. The cholesterol was in the normal range, triglycerides, he was not diabetic. So everything on the inside was good. So that's why I'm saying you've got to, when you're working with people, whether they're recreational athletes, whether they're elite athletes, you know, just because they're got abs doesn't necessarily mean that they're healthy on the inside. And so that's why I like to put this image in here and like to mention this is, you know, who knows, this cat in the picture could have perfect, you know, blood work, blood pressure, and be fine. Okay. It just needs to maybe lose a few pounds for himself and to feel better, maybe. So everybody okay with that? And I also want to now go into an understanding that there's a difference between body composition, right, and BMI. How many of y'all understand that? There's a difference. Just because I say I'm, let's say I do my body fat measurement, I'm 27% body fat. That does not equal a BMI of 27. Okay, those are two separate things. And students sometimes get those confused. What ideally you would like to do is to measure their body fat. Because body fat, and this is what the slide suggests, is that body fat really looks and talks about the how the body is composed. BMI, what are the two factors that you use to measure BMI? Somebody, you should know this. What are the BMI parts? What are the type it in the chat. Yeah, there you go. Height and weight. And what's that definition? It's like weight in kg, in kilograms, divided by, and this is the metric, height in meters squared. I can't do the square thing, but you get the idea. So that's that's how you do this calculation. And again, there's an imperial or English version. I never can remember that one. It's like 703 times something, something, something. I always tend to remember the metric version. But point is, a BMI, there are no, what is this? Just a number. It's just a number. And what I would suggest is that the BMI is just one tool that you can use to assess someone's health. And some of you, especially athletes, and that's why I said athletes' body composition is of a greater concern than weight or BMI, because we know with athletes tend to have more what? What do athletes tend to have more of than, say, general exercisers? They tend to have more muscle mass. You know, you especially talk about in your strength and power sports. So what happens is that extra muscle, which may not be, is not a bad thing, right? Extra muscle we know is a good thing. So extra muscle increases the weight, which increases the BMI. Right? Some of you, how many of you are like me? I'm always, even when I'm relatively fit, I'm always around that 23, 24, 25 BMI. How many of you are like that? Tell me in the chat. Yeah, you're like that. Yeah. And some of you probably with BMI, you grew up here in Arkansas, and they measured that. How many of you had your BMI measured in school? I mean, for years, I would have long conversations, not long, but I'd have conversations when we got into this chapter around BMI and how they're being, yeah. How many of you had it measured? Anybody? I think they've stopped doing it, but there was some huge problems with that because kids are growing. And so it's hard to say, because what they would do is they would measure BMI. They'd take all the third graders and fourth graders and line them up, and they would do height and weight and measure their BMI. And then they would send it home on their report card that they were obese. So, I mean, that's a morale booster. Not really, right? Most parents are like, okay, and wouldn't do anything about it anyway. But the truth is, these kids are still growing. And so it's really hard to say, oh my gosh, you got to do something about this kid. What we do know is that, and this is why BMI, it's a tool that you can use, but it should be the only tool you look at, is that BMI as you get older, because as we get older, as we age, most of our excess weight does come from fat. Does that make sense? So as we do age, because most people are inactive. Now, if you're active, then this idea falls apart. But that's why they use them in these big research studies, especially for adults, is because it's an easy way to characterize the population just by doing height and weight. Not a whole lot of effort there. But how accurate is it and what it really tells us? It's not that great. And if you know this, the numbers, this is something you should all know as a nutrition and exercise professional. Under 17, what's that? Underweight. And then it's like 18 to 24.9. Oops, 24.9 equals normal. 25 to 29.9 equals, this is where I usually fall, overweight. And then 30 or above, obese. And nobody wants to be called obese. So again, this is just one tool. And if you look at this and you're like, okay, they have a BMI of 30. And then you do all their blood work and that turns out to be pretty good. But their BMI of 30, that's one thing. Okay, we need to take note of that. We need to kind of pay attention. It's another thing that if your BMI is 75, okay, yeah, then that's going to be a problem. Because what we know is that BMI, the higher the BMI, and I agree with this, BMI, higher BMI, higher equals increased disease risk. For sure. So it's something to watch, but don't just get in a hussy and a panic that, oh my gosh, my BMI is 30 or 35. If it's 50 or 60 or 70, okay, we've got some work to do, right? Then yes. And then another thing I want to point out here with this picture is this female who's on the lifting the, I guess she's doing pull-ups, and she is like bowed up and muscular beyond, what's normal. And what I would say is that she is probably getting some help from some performance enhancing drugs. Because you don't get this big as a female without having some testosterone. Females do have testosterone, but they don't have enough to get this big. And especially as we age, that becomes a problem. And a lot of like if you're looking in the bodybuilding magazines, a lot of these, well, men for sure and women are on steroids. And so that's how they, and other products too. We can talk about it in the supplements chapter, but bottom line is they're getting help. And so what you see is I put this in here because ladies look at this and that stops them see this and use it as an excuse, as a reason not to weight train. And there's too many other great benefits of strength training, and you do not have to worry about getting big and bulky. Is it true that some ladies have a genetic predisposition of gaining more muscle? They do, but not to this extent. Okay. So just know that there's so many other reasons, like increased self-esteem. What else? Bone mineral density, just overall health and maintaining a healthy body weight. So don't think that you're going to get big and bulky, because you're not. All right. So that, and so just know, like I was going back from the first thing I said, is that this body composition assessment, these tests that we can do, the number you get is different than BMI. So on a test, I do not want anybody to miss the concept of, a 27% body fat. I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again, versus a BMI of 27. Totally different. Okay. Two separate measurements. And I'll show you how you get confused and as we go through some of these techniques. All right. So let's get into the techniques. And what I will say is that there are several techniques. There are lots of techniques to assess body composition. Every single one of them, no matter what technique you use, will have sources of error. And anywhere from about, let's see if I can put this in the chat, they're probably just even 3 to 5% error in these techniques, each one of them. So this is why people freak out. I know, because this is a sports nutrition class. They go into the gym, they go into the hyper center, they get their body fat measured, and they're like, okay, it's 15%, right? Awesome. Then they come back in and this is week 1. And then they come back in week 6, or maybe it's even week 3, maybe even the next week. Week 3, and it's like, what did they say? Like 17%. And they start freaking out. But the reality is there's
that much error within the test. And that becomes a problem for people. This is why you have to use the same procedures. This is why you have to have experienced people doing the testing, because you want to get these consistent results, and just know that there's just the source of error within all these tests, and it may be one direction or another, right? It all feels good when you come back and instead of 15%, you're 13%. And to see a big change over the weeks, it's going to take you 4, 6, 8 weeks to really see true changes in body composition. It doesn't happen overnight. Okay, that's for sure. Can you change your weight overnight? Sure. Don't drink any fluid and eat very little, and you're going to lose some weight. But the true body composition changes, it's going to take some time for that to happen. And so the whole goal here, as you see this, is to assess and monitor progress. So if you do have somebody and their body composition is 20%, that's what we just typically say, right? They're 20% body fat, but they set a goal of, you want to set a goal of something that's achievable. Let's say you want to, let's go 18%. What tends to happen is individuals set goals that are too unrealistic. It happens with weight all the time, right? You've got somebody who's 200 pounds and they set a goal, right? They're currently 200 and they set a goal of 150 pounds. Anybody work with some folks like that? Like, okay, I want to lose 50 pounds. And then you ask them, and if you've had a counseling class, I know some of you are in counseling now in the nutrition department, in our department, but if you ask them, this is a common question, and this is a question you should ask. It's like, if they say their goal is 150 pounds, they want to lose 50 pounds. It's like, when is the last time you've been this weight, right? 150 pounds. When's the last time you were there? They're probably going to say high school. I don't know. They're going to say, good chance they're going to say high school or 20 years ago. Right? So oftentimes people, they have unrealistic goals, and it's probably better and this is something we can talk about in our next lesson around how to get people to their goals, is to start with these smaller landmarks or smaller weights and body fat percentages, smaller changes over time. You want to make changes, but if you set your goals too big, then people get frustrated. Happens all the time. You have somebody that they're 200 pounds and they want to be 150, and they lose 20 pounds, which is awesome. But instead of celebrating the 20 pounds, how many of you know this? Celebrating the 20 pounds, they get frustrated and are so upset because they haven't lost the other 30. Well, they're so focused on that and not celebrating that they've had some success, and then they just give up. And then they not only gain the 20 pounds back, but then they gain extra on top of that. Does that make sense? So the whole goal of doing this assessment is to have a starting point. Same thing when we start talking about like calculating calories and putting a meal plan together, right? It's just, this is where we start. So if you got somebody that's 25%, body fat, maybe the goal is to get them to just a couple of percent. Maybe your goal is to get them to 22%. Again, you want them to come up with that number, but you want it to be these small incremental goals. And so you make these small changes over time, you get some momentum, get some progress. And then when you get to 22, okay, let's shoot for 20. Let's see what we can do. Okay. And again, we can go through all that, but point here is monitor and assess over time. And then when you find a method, stick with it. If you're changing methods up when you're assessing body composition, you're not going to get the same number. It's just not going to happen.
And this is another reason you want to have somebody, you want the procedures to be the same. You want the experienced clinicians to be doing these tests, but find a method and stick with it. It's just going to give you better results. So everybody okay with that? Are we good? Give me a thumbs up. You still with me? You know, now we're going to get into the different, okay, good deal. Now we're going to get into the different techniques. And the original body composition test was called underwater weighing or hydrostatic weighing. How many of you have heard this before? Anybody? Okay. My guess is you've probably never done this because it's, like I said, the original method. Anybody done this test? My guess is no. This is a picture of me when I was at Arkansas Tech. We actually had a hydrostatic weighing tank there. I'm guessing it's not in use anymore. Back in the day when I was there, if you see these little hoses at the bottom down here, they're supposed to have a heater. But the heater broke, and I don't know if they ever fixed it. And the water is frigid, like going like right now, like it's 40, 50 degrees outside. It's really cold. Getting in that tank of cold water doesn't sound that exciting. But even then, the way this works is it uses Archimedes' principle, which is the principle of buoyancy, to assess body composition and body fat and how much lean muscle you have. And so when you do this test, the whole idea is you've got this tank and you fill it with water, and inside this, and you can see the chain going down, and this chain down here, and you can't see it, is attached to a chair, and this chair is just made out of PVC pipe and some strips like you would find in an old lawn chair. And and so there's a weight, and that's what you're seeing here. There's got this scale, and just the chain and the chair alone, this is in kilograms. So this is 0 kilograms, right? This is 1 kilogram, 2 kilograms. So it's almost like just the chain and the weight and the chair alone is about 2 kilograms. So then you get someone to sit in this water. Again, they wear their bathing suit. And the whole idea is you see the subject submerged, they go underwater and they blow all their air out. And what ends up happening is this scale then will start, and this is the hard part, and this is why a lot of times some of these scales were electronic. But so if it starts here, then you're trying to watch this thing as it hits here and here. And so this would be, so this is 0, 1 kilogram, 2 kilograms. This is 3 kilograms, 4 kilograms. And then if it gets back over here, it's 5 kilograms. And up here. So you're having to watch this thing spin around. It is not easy. Plus, you got your subject who has to go underwater and blow all their air out and hold it, because you're waiting for this scale to stabilize for just an instant, because it's very sensitive with the water and the chain here and the chair, and it's moving around. It'll stop for just a brief instant, and then you write that number down, and it's in kilograms. And what we know is that in water, do we want to, this is a good question, do you want to be heavier? So when you do this measurement, or lighter in the water? What do you think? So this process of underwater weighing, hydrostatic weighing, uses water displacement. That's what Archimedes' principle is. If you've studied this, it has to do with physics. So type in the chat, do you want to be heavier or lighter in the water? So Archimedes' principle, if you study this, yeah, Vincent says heavier. Because what do we know about fat? What does fat do in water? Somebody? What does fat do in the water? Yeah, fat floats. That's right. And muscle sinks. That's right. Fat floats and muscle sinks. So you want to be heavier. And so you're using this water displacement, and again, you can look up the Archimedes principle. Essentially, it goes back to there was a king, and he wanted a crown. He wanted gold on his crown,
He wanted a certain amount of gold, so he gave it to the blacksmith, and the blacksmith put the gold on the crown. But the king got it back, and he's like, I don't think there's enough gold on this crown. So he asked Archimedes to figure that out. So Archimedes, to figure that out, he put the crown in some bathtub. So that's where you get the water displacement aspect and the principle of buoyancy. And this is the one where, and I think maybe he was even in the bathtub. You have to look at the story, but this is where he got out of the bathtub naked and started running down the streets saying, Eureka, I found it. If you've heard that before, Eureka, I found it. That was Archimedes. He was like this boy genius that people would ask questions and he'd figure stuff out. But point is, yeah, more density. So that's okay, Gage. That's where people get confused. And this is, so then I'll ask you this for fun. Which weighs more, a pound of fat or a pound of muscle? Which weighs more? Which weighs more, a pound of fat or a pound of muscle? What do you think? The same, yes, exactly. But this is where people get confused, is that they always say, this is the most common thing they say, right? Muscle weighs more than fat. Everybody heard that? I'm sure you have. Muscle weighs more than fat. Well, it doesn't. What they're wanting to say, and somebody said this, is that muscle is more dense than fat. And usually they're comparing it in water. That's why fat is less dense than water, so it floats. Muscle is more dense than water, so it sinks. But they get this confused all the time, and they say muscle weighs more than fat. No, not really. If you've seen pictures, and you can pull this up on the Google, and you have a pound of muscle and a pound of fat, what you're going to see is that the pound of fat has more what? Volume. It's bigger. Like a pound of fat is like this big thing, right? Where a pound of muscle is just this little small piece. So that's the difference. But this test is not easy, because this hydrostatic weighing test or underwater weighing using water displacement is not easy, because just doing one test is not good enough. Like for research, and like what we would do is we would actually do like 10 measurements of their weight underwater, at least 5 to 6 for like a lab. When we would do a lab using this hydrostatic weighing, we would at least do 5 or 6. And so it becomes a problem if you got people who aren't comfortable in the water. Like I would have these guys and they would be macho, and I'm going to do this hydrostatic weighing, I want to see what my body fat is. But then we'd get them in the water and ask them to go underwater, blow all their air out and hold it. They would be underwater for like a split second, and they would come back up. Did you get my number? I'm like, no, dude, you were down there for like a millisecond. Because what we would do is we would, if you look at this picture, we'd have, and this is one of the other things, right? When you're doing any kind of exercise science or nutrition lab, this is the way it works, right? Because the equipment, we just had one person in the water doing the test, and like the other 20 students standing around watching them do it. But so what we do is we're standing here. Once we got our number, we would just tap on the tank to let the subjects know, hey, we got it, come on up. But you just got to be comfortable underwater. And a lot of them weren't. So basically what we're doing is, just mentioning this, is we're the process is called densiometry. We're measuring their body density. And I used to do a lab where I would have the physics department. I would have physics students. I forgot what class it was, physics class. And we would talk about this, because that's what this is. This is physics. So basically we know density equals mass divided by volume. And to get the volume, we basically measure their weight in the water and their weight on land. So we measure their body weight on land and subtracted by the body weight in the water. And their density was their body weight on land divided by the volume. And then you get this little bitty number. And I don't know if you even study this in your classes, but this number would be like minuscule. I mean, and then just be like something like that, like 1.002023. But you would have to keep that in your calculator, because if you didn't, it might affect the percent body fat. Because what you do is you take that body density that you get and you put it into a formula to calculate body fat. So there's a process to this. And like I said, there's a whole, like when we do this lab, there'd be a whole sheet of stuff you'd have to fill out. You'd have to write down their weight in the water, right? You'd have to do their weight on land. You'd have to usually do that before you put them in the water, right? Before you went to the tank. And you can see how this tank is actually in a swimming pool. This is because you got to have access to water and you got to be able to drain this thing. So that became a whole issue. But you basically, it's a whole sheet that we'd work through and do these calculations. I mean, it was a lot, but that's the idea behind this test. And it was the gold standard for a really, really long time. And now what I'm doing is I'm going to jump forward to the current gold standard. It's something called a DEXA scan. Anybody heard of this one? DEXA scan. And it's just a fancy way, as you see, this dual energy X-ray absorptometry. That's why we call it DEXA. But this is kind of the current gold standard, because what you can do, and you see this, is this person is just laying there. So first off, this is a passive test. And you got this big arm that covers this whole thing. And this whole arm will move and scan the individual's body. And this is the one where, like in some of your textbooks, you see the individual and they're just standing with their arms out to the side, and you see the yellows and the reds and the greens and the blues. This is a DEXA scan report. The difference is between the hydrostatic weigh-in. Even back in the day, this was like a $12,000 piece of equipment. This is more like 112. It's like 100, 150. I don't know how much this costs, but it's very expensive. But it's our latest gold standard. And this is where we're talking about the different models of body composition. This is where you can get granular with everything. It's because this will do it for you. And I think there are some places, we don't have one on campus, but I think Baptist has one. There's certain hospitals, and I don't know if I'm surely UMS has one that you could pay. I know Baptist, I think you can pay to go have your test done. And it's not a bad idea every so often just to see. Oftentimes the doctors will refer like female patients who maybe they're losing their bone mineral density, guys too, but just to test it. So that's the easy one. That's just an X-ray scan. It scans your entire body, assesses, all the components. But if you had to ask me which one if I had the choice of getting one assessment method here on campus, I would say the bod pod would be it for me. It's pretty easy to, and this one probably is still $60,000, $80,000. I mean, it's expensive. But the way this works, instead of water displacement like underwater weigh-in, it's air displacement. And the fancy word is air plethysmography. You basically have this egg-shaped device, and you know when the door closed on this thing how much air is in there. Well, then you open it up, and again the person has to be limited clothes. Sometimes they'll even put a swim cap on them, to hold the hair down. But they will get into this egg, and then they'll close the door, and it determines body fat based on how much air you've displaced. And the nice thing too, just like the DEXA scan, is computerized. I think you just sit in there for a couple of minutes, and then it spits out the results in your body fat. Now, these pictures I got from a colleague that actually has one of these in her lab in Ohio, I think. I said, hey, yeah, please send me some pictures. So she sent me a couple of pictures, and I use these for my slideshow. But you can see it's pretty easy to get this test done. But you think about all the different places on campus that could use this. Like now we have this integrated health science building. There's a perfect tool that we could use that,
athletics could use, that exercise, sports science can use, and nutrition could use. Just a lot of different, and just the general population on campus that wanted to get there, or off campus community could use it too, right? All right. But this is what I would do. Most of the studies show pretty good effectiveness and reliability, validity of using a bod pod. Now, the last two that we're going to talk about are the ones you're probably most familiar with. How many, type in the chat, have done skin fold calipers? How many either you've used them to test, or you've been tested? Skin fold calipers. Yes, done both. Yeah. So what you'll see is they come in like I don't know if this is going to show or not, but in a little case. I even have some. That's what happens when you're old and you've done this long enough. You end up getting your own. But so this is just calipers. And it looks exactly, the ones I have, they don't have the little label on them. Close gently. That's so funny. It says that on the, because that's one of the mistakes you see people make. When I used to teach this, I would have students do 50 skin fold tests. This is even before, in this fitness assessment, they would do like 50 tests as part of the class. That's just a minimum to even get them to where I think I would feel comfortable with them doing a test at the fitness center or doing a test at, in a hospital or clinic, because you have to have experience knowing how to do these tests. And so let's start with what's on the slide. How does this test work? Well, you pinch different sites on the body. And what we know is that the subcutaneous fat, the fat that's below the skin, is proportional to someone's overall total body fat. And that's how we do this. So we pinch 3 sites on the skin, we add those up, and then we put them, guess what? We put them into a calculation that determines body density, just like we did with the hydrostatic weigh-in. You get some little bitty number for body density, then you put that into the calculation for body fat. But as you know, if you've done this or you've been tested, that there's certain procedures that you have to follow. The first thing you do is you actually mark and measure the sites. And that's a whole thing too. You got to know how to do that, right? And there are anatomical landmarks for each of these. And we know that there are 3 and 7 site skin folds. Have y'all done both 3 site and 7 site? I usually just use the 3 site skin fold test. They tend to be just as accurate as the 7 site. And so for those of you who have done 3 site, give me because they're different, right? For males and females, give me the 3 sites for males and the 3 sites for females. Somebody. Okay. So there you go. That's close, right? And so for males, it's the chest, abdomen, and thigh. For females, it's the triceps, right? I think you got there triceps, suprailiac. Oh gosh, suprailiac and thigh. Let's see. It's telling me I spelled that wrong, which is not surprising. Suprailiac. There's probably not even realizing that's a word. It's like, what is that? I'll type it in. It's suprailiac. It's right above your iliac crest, right? And each one of these has a specific, like the chest, if you've done it, it's a diagonal fold. There are certain folds and you have to grab it a certain way. The abdomen, everything's done on the right side of the body. So there are like strict procedures you've got to follow. And it takes some skill to do this. Same thing with the thigh, right? The thigh is like a vertical fold, just like the abdomen. The suprailiac is a diagonal fold. So how do you know exactly? So you actually would measure this and like chest, there's a certain landmark. Like anybody remember? See if I can remember. It's been a long time. The chest measurement for the male is half the distance between the nipple and the anterior axillary line. I don't know where that came from. But that's my point is there's a landmark for all of these different sites. The thigh measurement is half the distance between the inguinal crease, which is the crease when you bend your leg, and the top of the patella. Anybody remember that? Did they have you do that in the assessment class, where you actually take a tape measure and you measure it and you find half the distance and you mark it on either side and you go through that process? I hope so, because you can't just eyeball this stuff, right? There's a certain procedure that you need to follow. And then that's only part of it, right? Because people freak out when you do this skin fold test with the results, because what's the unit of measurement on a skin fold caliper? What's the unit of measure? And you can see kind of from here, but you really can't. You kind of have to know that. I don't know that you could see it on mine if I were to hold it up. It's in millimeters. Yeah, it's in millimeters. So there's a really small measurement. So if that's a decision you have to make, oftentimes, like in a class, you'll have 3 people, right? You'll have this working together. You have the subject, you have the person who's doing the test and getting the experience, and then you'll have somebody writing the numbers down. Because the way this works is you start out and you do, say for a male, you do the chest measurement, then you do the ab measurement, then you do the thigh measurement, then you rotate back through. You don't do 3 measurements on the chest and then 3 measurements on the, you don't do it that way. You rotate through the sites. But when you're rotating, if you do the measurement and then you get their chest measurement and you call out to your buddy, you say, hey, the chest measurement is 25. The subject, especially if it's in like a community setting, they have no idea what that means. You're like, 25, that sounds like a lot, right? They get freak out. Don't freak out. And you try to tell them, right, that this caliper, and there's a way, hopefully, that they're doing this in exercise sense. When you're doing the test, you just don't start doing the test. You show them, okay, here's the calipers. I'm going to pinch, I'm going to pinch different sites, and you tell them what you're going to do. And you say, hey, this dial, it reads in millimeters, which is a small number. You make them feel comfortable. But most of the time, if I was doing this, I would just write the numbers down, not even call them out, and write them down on paper. Okay. And then what we know is that as you rotate through the sites, if you don't get within 2 millimeters, then you have to redo the site. So if I go the first time through, I got 25 on chest, and I rotate and come back around the chest and I get like 15, well, wait a minute, something's way off. Okay, so we need to go back through that at one more time. And that's how you get the 3 sites. You add those up, the sum of the 3 sites, and then you plug that into the calculation to get the body density and then to get body fat. Everybody okay with this? But again, it goes back to the fact that this method, subcutaneous fat is proportional to your overall total body fat. And then the last measurement, the last assessment method for body composition is bioelectrical impedance. My guess is almost everybody has had experience with this. Sometimes we call it BIA, bioelectrical impedance analysis. Sometimes you'll see it written that way. And we use a common device. This Omeron is one of the most popular ways we do it. Type in the chat if you've done assessment body composition with bioelectrical impedance. Yeah, most of you probably have. This is the simplest, easy method. These devices are relatively cheap. Like even this skin fold caliper back in the day used to cost $150. So it's not too expensive, but still $150. This bioelectrical impedance device, you could probably buy it on Amazon for $50. I don't know. But the way this works is, and you see this, your body is basically an electrical conductor. Everything's electrical activity. nerve conduction, heart contraction, all these different things. And even for our body, remember what we talked about is that muscle has more water and fat has less water, right? So the way this, and you see this picture, these little places on the, you call them electrodes, whatever, you put your hands on the sides here. And the way this works is it sends an electrical current, really small electrical current, from one arm or one hand to the other hand. Back when we first started doing bioelectrical impedance, we would put like electrodes on the wrists and on the ankles, but we know we don't need to do that now. We just have these little handheld devices, and it sends a current from one arm to the other. Or if you got anybody done this where you stand on a scale, now they've got them on scales where it'll do your weight, and it also gives you your body fat. Same idea, it just goes from one leg to the other. Everybody good with that? What else do I want to say on that? Yeah, so here's what we know is that because and the voltage on this current is really small, about the size of like about as high as like a flashlight battery. It's pretty low. But what we know is that if you have more water, then there's less resistance. Less resistance to the current. More muscle. Okay. The more muscle you have, the less resistance. The more fat you have, more resistance. Everybody following that? So this then is measured in, the resistance is measured in a unit called ohms. The ohms is then converted to estimate percent body fat. That's how this works. Now, one of the things I haven't said is, as you're going through these different tests, like this one in particular, what do you think would be a source of error for this test? What would be the biggest issue around, if you were having somebody do this test, what question would you want to know from them? What do you think? What's one of the factors that will affect the results of this test? So the percent, this is percent body fat estimated based on resistance to conductivity. Anybody want to take a shot at one of the biggest, probably the biggest factor that would affect the results of this test based on what we just said? Anybody? Well, it's hydration status. Yeah, fluid intake. That's right, hydration status. Because we just said the more water you have, the muscle has more water. So if you were to guzzle a bunch of water 30 minutes to an hour before this test, there's a good chance that it would show that you're very lean, or you would be less body fat. Less body fat with lots. If you're with, I just call it hyperhydration. Not that you're going to have that much. When you guzzle a bunch of water before, that's going to fool this system, this device, into thinking, okay, I've got more fluid, so that the conductivity is going to be easier, less resistance. It's going to make it seem like you got less body fat. Same thing if you're dehydrated. If you're dehydrated, it's going to make it seem like you got more fat. So you want to overconsume. You just want to have a normal fluid intake, and honestly, I don't know what the procedure is like. You don't want to drink a couple hours before you come in or something. It's probably what they would tell you. But the hydration status would affect this, just like with the skin fold measures. The experience of the user, the person who's actually doing the testing, is going to be the biggest factor.
like going back to what we said at the beginning, like there's 3 to 5% error in all these tests. You know, the DEXA scan, I don't know what the like a source of error would be. Maybe it would be related to the software or the actual device, maybe. You know, I'm just thinking bod pod, maybe it's the amount of clothes you're wearing, or, you know, that might be an example. And again, we talked about the hydrostatic weigh and having the subjects and being able to stay underwater. And there's just tons of sources of error for that. But with that, I'm going to stop sharing. So that's what I wanted to do today. I wanted to have a class here where we just talk about the techniques. And this is a class that I know, like I've got 7 students here. And let me make sure I got Alex here. I've got Austin here. I've got Bryce and Gage and Caitlin and Tucker and Vincent. I appreciate y'all coming. Maybe one of y'all got, there was somebody, I wanted y'all to contact people, but maybe not, maybe like, nah, forget them. I'm here. So I'm adding 10 points. I had to figure out how to do it to your grade for attending here right before Thanksgiving, because I appreciate you being here and being live. That's really all I want to do for today. Next class, when we come back from break, we'll get into kind of understanding, you know, why would people want to, you know, lose weight? And sometimes, and why would people want to gain weight, gain muscle, and how to go about doing that, and maybe some strategies on doing this. And we'll get into talking about calculating target body weight, which is our next assignment. But just remember, your meal planning assignment is due tonight. And if you know somebody in the class, tell them, hey, don't forget the meal planning assignment. I may send out an announcement just because it's Thanksgiving week and people aren't focused on, you know, taking care of business. But anyway, I appreciate y'all being here. If you have any questions, let me know. Have a great, wonderful Thanksgiving. Enjoy your family. Enjoy all the shenanigans that tend to take place during Thanksgiving. And we'll see you back here next week. All right. Bye.